actually usually hate making videos about court decisions on our Second Amendment rights. Not because they're not important, obviously, but because it just seems like it's always like some level of clickbait where I gotta like string you guys along to the next one. But I have some news for you here, and I'm not just stringing you along this time. The sensitive places law is about to die because we have had some massive case rulings recently that will ultimately lead to the death of these unconstitutional infringements, and that's what I want to go over today. But first, before I get started, my name is Jay Costa, and if you get value after watching this video, please hit that like button down below. Also consider subscribing as we build a community of like-minded individuals who are looking to fight for, protect, and defend our Second Amendment rights here in the state of New Jersey, as well as other blue states like it. So if that interests you, hit that subscribe button and share with a bunch of your buddies that are also living where we call behind enemy lines. Now let's just jump right in and start off with the Hemani case. The Hemani case, which struck down the federal ban on firearm possession by quote-unquote unlawful users of controlled substances. The court held that there were no sufficiently analogous historical laws to point to in order to keep this law in effect. Although this decision was very narrow, it reinforced strict, relevantly similar scrutiny. So governments cannot rely on loose analogies anymore. Now, in the Hemani case, the government tried to draw similarities to historical laws on intoxicants that were limited to incapacitation. In other words, habitual drunkards and addicts who were a clear threat or danger to the public or themselves, not everyday regular users. Now, this totally cuts against the sweeping, sensitive location designations of places like parks, beaches, stores, or restaurants. Historical analogs could potentially be shown for a very narrow scope of locations like schools or polling places, maybe, but certainly not turning everyday life locations into government-mandated gun-free zones, which is exactly what these sensitive places laws do, and that's what their intent is as well. Now, if the Supreme Court of the United States won't let government ban guns for regular pot smokers without proving danger, why should New Jersey be able to ban them in every park or beach based on a very vague sort of crowd fear? The history just doesn't support it. Then, just weeks after the Hemani decision, the Supreme Court of the United States struck down another broad restriction in Wolford versus Lopez. This was a big one. Hawaii tried to make you ask permission to carry on private property open to the public. New Jersey's sensitive places law has essentially done the same thing. This included malls, retail stores, restaurants, really anywhere that's open to the public, but still privately owned property. Now, GOAT U.S. Supreme Court Justice and New Jersey native Samuel Alito emphasized in his opinion that the law effectively turned routine public businesses into gun-free zones mandated by the state unless property owners opted in. This is obviously a burden to the core right to carry for self-defense while going about daily life, a clear infringement on the absolute text of the Second Amendment. New Jersey's sensitive places law does something similar by designating vast swaths of public spaces as presumptively off limits. Now, the Wolford decision now says states can't make carry impractical without showing a strong history to point to dating back to the founding era of 1791. Now, according to Alito, this Hawaii vampire rule failed two main thresholds. One being that it flat out violated the plain text of the Second Amendment, as we mentioned, as its intent was clearly to massively hinder and restrict the right for the concealed carry permit holders to bear arms outside the home by forcing them to ask for permission before doing so. Imagine having to ask to exercise a constitutionally protected right. And two, that it violated what's called common law, where he stated, quote, "This law departs sharply from the standard common law rule on access to private property held open to the public. Under that rule, everyone, including those lawfully carrying firearms, may enter unless expressly prohibited from doing so." In addition, it also violated the Bruin standard because the government was unable to point to any historical analogs of any similar law going back to 1791, when the Second Amendment was, of course, signed into law and made the law of the land. Lastly, just the other day, out of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, we had a key ruling in what's called Angelo versus D.C., where they reversed the lower court and held that gun owners have standing now to challenge D.C.'s ban on concealed carry on public transportation, which was labeled a quote-unquote sensitive place. They are now allowed to sue on the grounds of the Second Amendment because they can point to specific damages incurred by the law. Let's say a concealed carry permit holder wants to defend themselves in public, but they take public transit to work every day. Well, since DC banned carrying on public transportation, that concealed carrier now has to, drive their car to work instead, or maybe take an Uber at a higher cost. That's a pocketbook expense. That law-abiding citizen is now being punished and injured just for exercising a constitutionally protected right. The court stated that, quote, because the pistol owners have alleged a pocketbook injury that is caused by their compliance with an allegedly unconstitutional criminal statute, we reverse and remand the case for additional proceedings. The plaintiffs also argued that there is no historical tradition of banning firearms on public transportation at all. In fact, colonial laws often required carrying arms while traveling, and even 19th century concealed carry rules had exceptions for travelers. And that's not even the founding era. The Angelo ruling shows the strict historical test and threshold that courts are now judging Second Amendment cases with, all because of the Bruin decision in 2022. It also continues to show the willingness by courts to scrutinize these quote-unquote sensitive location labels in locations that would be a part of everyday American life. You see, even in deep blue DC, courts are now forcing real historical proof for so-called sensitive places like public transit. If public transit doesn't have the tradition, neither do the parks, neither do the beaches, neither do the restaurants. Angelo is the latest proof that these blanket bans are getting picked apart one location at a time. That sounds all great, but now what? Well, these 3 wins, the 2 in the Supreme Court and 1 in the U.S. D.C. Appellate Court, are clearly massive victories for our Second Amendment rights across the country. But they really have what I think created a perfect storm for the next domino to fall, and that is the sensitive places laws. The sensitive places law is being currently challenged in the Koons and Siegel versus Platkin case, and according to New Jersey Second Amendment law experts, they have been explicitly waiting for the Wolford decision to come down before coming to a decision of their own. Now, I talked about this in a recent Behind Enemy Lines podcast episode with the Penn Patriot, John Petrolino. If you'd like to check that out, I will put a link to it in the corner right now and in the description box down below. Now, to no surprise, when the Wolford decision came down, the plaintiffs for the Koons and Siegel versus Platkin case filed what's called a 2.8J letter brief to the Third Circuit, arguing that the Supreme Court has now clarified in Wolford versus Lopez how lower courts should rule on 2A issues and what standards the restrictions set forth in New Jersey should have to meet. Now, many of New Jersey's existing sensitive places of banned locations to carry rely on the same weak historical analogies that failed in the Hemani case, they failed in the Wolford case, and then they failed in the Angelo case. The rulings of all 3 give the plaintiffs much stronger arguments to get that sensitive places law off the books, or at least reduce it significantly. There's also now much needed timely pressure on Koons and Siegel versus Platkin, which had oral arguments all the way back in 2023, so we've been waiting a while here. Wolford specifically gives the court a recent and very high authority, the Supreme Court, to come down with a ruling for the plaintiffs instead of waiting even longer. If the Third Circuit would rule to uphold New Jersey's restrictive laws that mirror the ones struck down in Wolford, it would show a lot of inconsistency, and courts generally prefer to avoid creating new splits with recent Supreme Court precedent. So, guys, I'm going to be real with you. We now have the wind at our backs. But as the Four Boxes Diner YouTube channel says, this is not just a battle. We won 3 battles here, but it's part of a bigger war. I know it sounds sometimes like this is a never-ending cycle and nothing ever really comes of it, but after years and even decades of losing these court battles, we are now winning. We're all carrying, or most of us anyway, because we're winning battle on battle on battle. Each one has a cumulative effect for the next one. Each one sets precedent in the courts that did not exist previously. Ultimately, we will win this war and be able to rightfully restore our Second Amendment rights back to where a place it should have never left, if we're being honest. We are winning these battles because of people like you making the fight, and also the foundations and the people in these foundations out there making the fight and the case for our Second Amendment rights as well, specifically in the courts. Foundations like the ANJRPC, the CNJFO, the Second Amendment Foundation, the NRA, among many others, they've all played a role in fighting for our Second Amendment rights, and we are finally starting to see the fruits of their and your labor. So please go support them and donate to them if you can. Every dollar helps go to winning these battles, and once again, eventually, the big war. We are also winning them, if we're all being honest with ourselves, because of the Trump administration. President Trump's federal court appointees in both of his terms across the country have given us a much, much, much more favorable and level playing field and environment to win these court battles. I cannot stress enough how important this has been. If Donald Trump did not win the election in 2016, we would not be allowed to conceal carry here in the state of New Jersey right now. So Never let perfect get in the way of good, and keep that in mind as we head into a very turbulent, let's call it, midterm election season. And make sure you go vote, and you vote the right way in November. That is it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below about these 3 cases, especially Wolford v. Lopez. That was a big one. I think that was a big domino to fall. From what I hear from other, from New Jersey Second Amendment law experts, they're expecting a ruling from the Koons and Siegel versus Platkin case maybe by the end, as early as the end of this summer, maybe into early fall. So we're getting very, very close here, and that would basically get rid of all or most of the ridiculous, unconstitutional, sensitive places laws that we're dealing with here in New Jersey, as well as other blue states like it. So let me know in the comment section down below. I appreciate you guys so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time. God bless. Keep fighting.